Well, hello there. Welcome to InVivo Leadership Strategies Podcast. I am your host, Layli Sadagiani, and today I am joined by Christopher Fox. He's the founder of Ideas-Led Growth. He helps financial service innovators become industry thought leaders. And there's so many ways to do this. I mean, some of the pieces you'll hear in our podcast. What we're going to do with him is we're going to discuss how to bring ideas to life. How do we break free from groupthink? And why it's crucial to focus on the unique insights of our people. And here's the thing. Their ideas are always going to be valuable than a generic suggestion or prompt that we put on ChatGPT. We want to celebrate the creativity that we bring as society, as our team. Tune in. I hope you enjoy the show. And I am so excited for you to hear all the valuable insights. So let's get right into it. Hi, Christopher. Thank you so much for joining my podcast, our InVivo Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited to have you. I want our audience to get to know you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience and what you've done so far?
Yeah, sure. So before I do that, I also want to thank you. I'm really excited to have a conversation about some of the topics that I think will really resonate with your audience. So I appreciate the invitation and the time to talk with you. As far as my background goes, I am currently the managing partner of and founder of a company called Ideas-Led Growth. And what we do, our focus is working with any company that you might call a financial innovator. That can be a large global bank, that can be a financial technology company, anyone who's doing something to have an impact and change on the global institutional financial system, which is obviously a very complex and wide area. I help those companies identify their thought leadership strategy. And that's the idea behind ideas-led growth is really excavating those ideas that differentiate my clients and then giving them the tools to articulate those ideas and then get those ideas out into the world in a way that makes sense to primarily the core stakeholders who matter to them. So their clients, potential clients, um, other companies in the institutional space, and sometimes even regulators.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah, and it's a complicated area where, especially with larger organizations, which are typically the type of client that I work with, that there are so many organizational silos. Marketing is all over here, and I don't know if everyone can see my hand. So they're all over here, and then people on this, and people will often say, "Well, we're in marketing, and then we need to talk to the business," as if they were two different things. They're not really two different things, but that siloing comes with all sorts of implications around who listens to who needs to defer to whom, how do the interactions work back and forth between pieces of the organization that have radically different skill sets and are coming from radically different points of view to start with.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So here's my first question. Based on what you just shared, this is perfect. So as a leader, how can I encourage diverse perspectives in a team environment like that? Especially when we're having discussions without being seen as overly critical or confrontational.
Yeah, that's such a key question because it's very easy for the dominant voice to take over a conversation. And a dominant voice, it can happen in one of two ways. It can happen because of hierarchy, right? Well, this person is senior to me on the org chart, so I have to defer to them. Or sometimes it can happen just because there's a good talker in the room. And this is a personal experience for me early in my career. One of the things I've always been is a good talker. I can clearly plow my way through an idea
Mhm.
and sound incredibly convincing. A lot of times I'm actually looking for people to like push back and like, okay, now you give me your equally clear point of view. But I noticed earlier in my career, now I try to mitigate this risk, is that other people would see that as a steamroll because it would be so clear and everyone's just kind of nodding along like, yes, I get that, that other points of view, people with other points of view would then be shy about getting it out because they weren't really equipped to package it in this way that, whatever unique set of gifts I have, I was able to bring to the table and say something just so clear and confident that everyone else just kind of like dissipates. And I've tried to learn not to do that as I've matured as a leader. That there are a few tactics that I use to help with that. One of them is establishing clear rules of engagement. Like I will actually tell people when I'm interacting with my own team or with clients, I'm going to say this in a way that sounds incredibly confident, but don't be fooled. I actually really want you to push back. Like I'll just tell them how to manage the perception of the way that I'm able to package and articulate ideas just because I, happen to have a strong skill set in verbal communication. So one of the things I think it's really important, whether you're talking about what I just said and that unique thing, or other factors that can tilt the table in a way that disfavors diverse perspectives, is to set out those clear rules of engagement. Like we're expected at this point in the process to say what we think. And everyone here should say why and ask why. I think those are really big principles. You really tell people, I want you to say why you're saying what you're saying. I want you to be ready and prepared and comfortable asking me why, just to make sure that people feel safe in their roles and identities when they're discussing ideas. That, like, I think that's so important because if you're, maybe it's just your personal psychology, you're kind of introverted, you're not the kind of person that's just going to blast out into a meeting and say what you think. Really encouraging people that whatever your role is, whatever your identity is, I want you to feel safe in your role, in your identity, discussing the ideas that we're talking about by asking why, by saying why. And then the other thing I think that's really important for leaders to do is you can have a lot of input. It can get very scattered, it can come from all over the place. I think you really need to have a very clear model of decision making. Who owns the decision? Who is the, and sometimes it's a terrible word, but who is the decider? Right. And being very clear, like things are open for debate now.
Mhm.
They're not open for debate past a certain point. And being very clear about that so that the rules of engagement are also like, this is a decision that's been made. We're now past the point of challenging it.
What I like about what you're saying is you're taking a very direct approach, meaning that when you speak with someone, you are encouraging them already to challenge you, to hear you, to say things. And so that encourages diversity in the conversation. Whereas I think what leaders tend to do is they assume position of power and immediately think people will give their ideas. Or we have leaders that tend to go in the heaviness of the ego and just want to
Yeah.
say, this is what it is. You deal with it. If I say so, you're going to do it. So if we take two different directions with the ones that have that big ego, how can they come back to earth a little bit more in those engagements?
Yeah, I guess that's a really good question. And partly it assumes that they want to, right? It's very hard to take someone who sees themselves on a pedestal and knock them off of it without it being an ugly scenario. So maybe they have to be wrong a couple of times and kind of, touch the hot stove once so that they don't do it again. Maybe it's more of them realizing that, kind of like what I was talking about with my ability to just steamroll any conversation in the way that I put my point of view out there, take a step back and just say, wait a minute, is that actually what I want to do in these interactions? And
You're
it genuinely wasn't. It was part of my training. I went to grad school. I got my PhD in French literature. I was very used to having very tough debates over issues, over, a guest speaker would come, a guest lecturer would come. You'd ask that person the hardest question you possibly could. You'd push back, and there was a willingness to battle out ideas that actually doesn't really live outside of academia. And I had to learn how not to be that person because I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't, when I took my first management position and I noticed myself doing that to some of the people on my team, I started to realize, well, I just don't want to be like that, partly because I just don't want to, and partly because, hey, wait a minute, other people may not be as strong at saying what they think, but they have ideas or reservations or points of view that we really ought to have considered. And if you don't create the space for those things to come out, then you lose the opportunity to look at things through a different point of view.
What I also liked about the second piece you said is the level of self-awareness that you practiced, because anyone in your position would have just kept talking,
That's, that's
right?
right. It happens.
That's the self-awareness you bring, which actually leads me to the next question that I have for you. Are there strategies we can use to identify and address groupthink? Let's say when I sense it happening with my team or organization, that's again the more of the self-awareness piece. What can we do? What strategies can we use?
Right. Well, what's really seductive and dangerous about groupthink is it kind of comes back to a cognitive bias. If everyone's point of view starts to coalesce around what you believe, because you've already essentially stacked the deck in favor of what you believe and gotten everyone to think the same thing because you just happen to overpower a particular scenario, then you really will get lost in all of the alternative perspectives because things already started to coalesce. And I think there's actually two questions in what you just asked. So there's a question about groupthink at the team level, and then there's a question about groupthink in kind of like the broader collective or conventional wisdom. Like, are you all coming to a conclusion that is something that you could just as easily have read in a newspaper or in a trade publication or in a blog or all over LinkedIn? And if that's the conclusion you come to because everyone is exposed to the same sources, that's another kind of groupthink. So I think there's organizational groupthink that happens because of organizational dynamics. And then I think there's broader, I don't know what to call it, industrial or collective groupthink that happens because there's just stuff in the wind and everyone is hearing it and seeing it at the same time. So what do you do about it? I think that's the more important question is there are these two types, but there's a similar answer to it, which is kind of relates to what I was saying before about the clear rules of engagement. I actually like to ask someone, overused metaphor, but I want you to be the devil's advocate. Whatever we say, I want you to be the naysayer. And I want you to push, like really asking people to push. It's important to choose the right persona for doing that. Some people will just be less comfortable being that. But when you have a team, you know who's maybe a little bit scrappy or a little bit more willing to roll up their sleeves and be a bit combative and be the naysayer. Sometimes you end up with that person on your team whether you want them or not. And then you just have that difficult person who's the hardest to persuade on the team. But if that person is the hardest to persuade, why not amplify that? Why not use that as a way to challenge what you're thinking and really propose like, hey, our thinking seems to be going in this direction. We seem to be coming to this conclusion. Let's stop for a minute and let's figure out, well, when and where might this not be valid?
Mhm. This is a really good point. And there's an example and I guess a situation that I've dealt with that I would love to know how you would, as a leader, work with me on. I've sat in management teams where I'm the only woman in the team.
Yeah.
the groupthink mentality really works because it becomes a quote unquote boys club and everyone agrees to it. So if even let's say someone was to ask me, this was earlier in my career, if someone was to ask me, "Hey Laylee, what are your thoughts?" And there's 12 of them that agree, even if they ask me that, I would feel a little bit shaken, a little bit scared to say something the opposite of them. What would you have for individuals like myself who are maybe the outsiders in a group?
Yeah, so I guess I would say there's a top down and a bottom up answer to that question. So from the top down, I really do think it's leaders' responsibility to make sure that like the person that you report to needs to be telling you consistently in what they say in conversations with you, but also in what they do, that regardless of what you might pipe up with as an objection in a scenario, you're always safe. Like let's make sure that the established precondition that we all know is that you can disagree and it's safe. So that's kind of the top-down view of making sure that that's always the case. And I think that's a commitment that leaders need to make, right? That I'm not going to put ego in this mix. This is about ideas. The ideas are talking to the ideas. I think that's a really important piece. The bottom up piece is I think a lot of ways, just try it, you know? Try like a little trial balloon, disagree a little softly. Don't over moderate your point of view to the extent that it kind of disrupts itself,
Mhm.
but try to disagree maybe on a lower level issue and then kind of build your case forward from there to do it a little bit more subtly. And I agree with you. I mean, you're talking about coming at it from the point of view as a woman. I think that all sorts of aspects of identity
Mhm.
and the dynamics around identity within corporate organizations. I mean, in most cases, most organizations still have some degree of boys club associated with it, right? I mean, if you look at the percentages of male versus female CEOs and CXOs across organizations, they're typically significantly more male than female in most roles,
Yeah.
right? And there are a lot of those. I mean, there's just infinite studies that have been done on the way that gender parity. You start off in an organization like people at the most junior roles tend to be like 50-50 or maybe even skewed more toward women. But
Mhm.
as you go up the tree in the organizational chart, there's this thing that happens where all of a sudden the percentages start to shift and it's more weighted toward men, more weighted toward men, and more weighted toward men. And then you get up to the top of the organization. This isn't a real number. I don't have a study in front of me, but it starts to look like 70 to 80% male at the top of the organization. That's really challenging, I think, for women. I think that's challenging for people who identify anywhere within the LGBTIQ space. I think it's challenging for people of different racial or ethnic identity from the, the main boys club that's running the company. It can be really, really challenging. And it happens in all sorts of ways.
Mm. And I want to commend you for noticing that it's at the end of the day, it's the organization's responsibility to create that space for people to feel like they don't have to say what the group says, which leads me to the culture aspect. How do I build a culture where my team members feel safe challenging the status quo or voicing dissenting opinions?
Yeah, so one thing I would reinforce, something I said earlier, which is when you have those clear rules of engagement, I think it's something that at least where we are in the world right now, it's something you have to say again and again and again. Always tell people that you expect them at particular points in a decision making or research or any other initiative or project, you want to say as the leader again and again and again that this is a safe space, that we're talking about projects, we're talking about ideas, we are not talking about people. I expect and invite you to disagree with me at every moment until a final decision is made. Like, I think if you just continue to say that, that really makes a huge difference. I think another thing is maybe kind of a bold move, but what if you actually put it in the performance review process? There's all sorts of cultural alignment line items on a typical corporate performance review. Disagreeing is not ever one of them. What if you did? What if you actually did make that bold move to say that this is a culture where people disagree respectfully, keeping their emotions in check, but then you actually put that in performance reviews so that managers will evaluate employees based on their doing that and incentivize them to do that because then it's part of the performance, right? So I,
That.
I think there's that. And I think there's also a balance. The other thing I would say is if you're working in any kind of situation where another leader, more or less at your level, is stifling dissent, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you can call them out on that. And you can say, maybe you say it, you don't do it in the meeting, you do it later. Say, I noticed that the way that you framed that issue didn't really create an opportunity for other people to speak up and share their point of view on it.
Mhm.
And I wonder if, there are ways to do it in a soft, like you can do a hard call out or a soft call out. I typically would do more of the soft call out because I think they get the message. But I think that should be part of it. And then the other piece of it, it's like call out and call on. As a leader of a particular project or even just a single meeting, call on people, ask them like, hey, person who's been quiet for this entire, for the past 45 minutes, what do you think about this? Tell me legitimately upfront, what do you think about the direction that we're taking or what we're considering?
Mhm.
So those to me are the main elements of building culture around it. And then the other thing, it really connects more to the kind of work that I do is, as I was saying, I work with companies on these thought leadership initiatives where you're really trying to draw out the ideas of the strongest innovators in the business. Those become really interesting scenarios that bring out all of these culture issues where a leader who's like a real hot shot in product development is telling you their point of view on something that might be like pretty complex and pretty technical, especially in like something related to a technicality of how hedge funds trade in derivatives. And if you don't know what the like kind of the inner mechanics of how hedge funds work, you can feel very cut off in your ability to participate in that conversation, to speak up and say, everything that you've said is valid, but that's not the best way to get the message out to the marketplace. And as an expert in communications and marketing, what I'm telling you is I don't have the same expertise as you in hedge funds, but I do know how to get ideas out into the world. And let's say that your ideas plus my ideas, plus there's people on the marketing team that actually, like, let's say we create a series of blog posts, there's people on the marketing team that then know how to get that stuff published and out into the world as fast as possible, and people on the PR team that know how to get it into the hands of the right media contacts. Let them do their thing as well. But also, if we're doing something that is going to result in like just an unreadable point of view that only someone who's equally technical would understand, maybe that's not the right move. And that's why I'm saying these thought leadership projects have a really interesting impact on building culture because they do force people with different capabilities and in different places in the organization and at different levels to come together to get a thing done.
I really am enjoying everything you're saying because it resonates with my experience leading a team and how those ideas can grow. And it really is about what norms you put out there as a leader and how you let your people show up for you. So There's another scenario I want to run by you. I have also been one of those leaders who wants to hear every idea, and sometimes that gets to be a lot. And then I've also been the
Hmm.
leader where I have to balance being decisive because I need to make sure all the voices are heard to avoid groupthink. What can I do in both of those instances?
Yeah, well, I'm going to use another example from the world that I work in, which is in financial services. So typically what happens, so a lot of people will be familiar with the idea that, pretty much everywhere, but let's focus on the US, the financial system is highly regulated.
Yeah.
And how do regulators actually come up with a new piece of regulation? Let's say that the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, so it's related to stocks and investments. How do they come up with a new regulation or a new amendment to a regulation? They don't just like invent it at all. They will put it out there as a proposal. There's typically a period of open comment where pretty much anyone can comment on it. If it's high impact, they'll also form industry working groups to provide input on, okay, well, we think we would like to put this control in place, but what does that actually mean for all of you? How expensive will it be to comply with this new regulation? What does it do to your technology, to your organization? You might not necessarily know this if you're not inside this world, but most regulators are pretty thoughtful and pretty cautious about how they come to these final decisions. And the reason why I bring it up is I think that's actually a great model for how organizations can work in general. There's a pending decision on the table. There's a period of open comment. If it's a big enough decision, you might actually put together a couple of working groups to say, like, hey, we're about we want to refresh some significant IT platform within our business. How are we going to come to that decision? I could just say, I talked to the chief technology officer at this IT company and we're going with them, right? Like that I have permission to do that as the CEO and founder of this company. Is that the right way to do it? No, because I don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the capability to tell me like, all right, well, what are all the pros and cons from a training perspective, from a technology perspective, a security perspective, does the user interface make sense? Will people be able to use it? Like you need to bring together all those points of view for consideration. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think that the idea and the goal here is when you see a decision coming, be aware that first of all, that it is a decision. Establish a clear boundary, like that this is the period during which I want to seek input, and this is the kind of input that I need. Let's you create that window of opportunity for input, and then you explain to people why I want all that input, how I intend to use it, and then also just having that transparency, like, you know what? Like, let's be really clear about how and why I'm making that decision so that I know how I'm doing it. I can explain to everyone else. I'm going to hear your input. I will not necessarily obey everyone's input.
Hmm. Everything you're saying to me really comes down to have a process of channeling these ideas well, and then also know that at the end of the day, you have to make a ruling of it, that it's not just all you can eat buffet for everybody to put
Yeah.
their 2 cents. So just kind of ending our conversation together, I really want to come to this question. What steps can I take to prevent my own biases or leadership styles from unintentionally contributing to groupthink in my team?
Yeah. So the first thing is talk to the people on your teams, but also your peers that you typically would interact with or might tend to interact with in project, talk with them one-on-one and in group scenarios about like I want everyone to understand my approach to decision making. This is the way that I make decisions. This is the way that we come together to make decisions. And just continue to have those conversations so that everyone feels reassured and reinforced.
Mhm.
I think another thing that people can do and should do is, you can easily Google this, cognitive biases and unconscious biases, and you'll find a list of them. And I don't know, there's dozens depending on who you ask. But there are some key cognitive biases like confirmation bias. You hear something that confirms what you already believe, you're more likely to believe it. Honestly, just create a checklist for yourself. Like these are the biases that I am most susceptible to. And when it's time to make a big decision, let me stop for a second and ask, like, hey, did like in that major conversation, that
Mhm.
like that big team meeting, did I fall into the three biases that I typically have caught myself having in the past? So there's cognitive biases, which are more just thinking process, like confirmation bias or something like that. There's also unconscious bias, which comes back down to some of those questions you were asking about identity. It is unfortunately really true that people may interpret the exact, like if a man said something and a woman said something in more or less the exact same tone, with the exact same content, it can be perceived differently. The same is true for racial and ethnic differences. The same is true for sexual identity differences. All of that can really impact how people hear points of view, right? I mean, it's the standard thing of like if a man is really aggressive, he's ambitious, and a woman who's really aggressive is bitch. Right?
Mhm.
And you would never admit to yourself that you think that consciously. What's the bad part about it is those things can worm your way into your unconscious, and you have to come back to that self-awareness to say, hey, wait a minute, like I actually do seem to be susceptible to this one. So let me literally check myself on a checklist, like go through, here are my top 10 bias weaknesses. Did I fall for them? Like, did I trick myself? Or did I remain clear in my decision making process? So
Uh,
that's another one. I would say make sure, it's a little bit of a cliche, but listen to understand. Like really listen to people and try to understand what they're saying, why they're saying. If you don't understand, ask the question.
mhm.
Don't listen to hear the thing that you wanted to hear and then pick it out of what they said so that you can move forward. Like that's really dangerous. And then I think the final thing that I would say on that topic is really try to put yourself in other people's shoes. I mean, it's a practice of empathy towards people on your team, but also other stakeholders who might not be at all part of the decision-making process, but whatever you decide will affect them. Like that example I gave, choosing an IT system. If you're choosing a platform, let's say for your sales and marketing, your CRM platform, the things that you decide as an executive leader are going to affect people that you in a larger organization that you've never met and never spoken to. Put yourself, practice that empathy and try to imagine for them, well, what does it mean that you're ripping out all the technology that I've been using for the past 6 years and you're giving me this new platform? Like, what is that going to do to my productivity, my level of confidence in my job? I think a lot of people don't ask themselves those questions about, well, how can I empathetically look at the impacts of my decision? And that can really help, I think, with this process because no one can do that on their own.
Mhm.
And one of the things I like to do is ask people in, whether it's in a client project or whether it's stuff I'm doing with my own team, I ask them to help me imagine. Help me imagine how people might interpret this message. I was working with one company that was trying to identify what are the five pillars of their culture. And you can say all sorts of things about whether exercises like that have all that much value. But one of the things that we really talked about and I really encourage them to do is, all right, so I don't want to give too many details because it is proprietary, Um, but you're thinking of sending this email unveiling, like, here's our company's 5 new values. You really better think through how people will receive that message, who will feel reinforced by that message, who will feel scolded, who will feel just like uncomfortable, who's going to look at it and say, well, that's just a bunch of bull and I don't really care. Like, if you genuinely value these behaviors and these cultural traits, is this really the right way to communicate them and get them out there? And encouraging that kind of empathy is really important to avoiding the groupthink and also creating a role for other people. Because when you are in this process of making a decision and it's kind of an open window, it's really hard for one person to empathetically imagine what that decision will do to everyone, like your inner circle of stakeholders and the next rung and the next rung. Like, it kind of propagates out. There's a ripple effect when you make a decision as a leader. But when you have a team participating in the process, you just get better at it, right? Like, I might make a decision that is completely insensitive or not really well tuned to the idea that, guess what? There are women who end up wanting to take maternity leave. And you could make an organizational decision that would be damaging. Just for, one example, it was just, it's you basically create this obstacle on the path to promotion that means someone who goes on maternity leave is like just much less likely to get that promotion because you've created these criteria. I might not notice that. If
Mhm.
I'm interacting with other people on my team, what I would hope is that there's someone smart enough and bold enough on the team to say, Chris, wait a minute, wait a minute. Look at what this would do to people who choose to take a 6-month break in their career, whether it's maternity leave or some other reason. And that's just one example. You could think of so many different examples where the leader, based on who they are and where they are, might not really think of, oh, look, you just changed my sales software and now I can't make my numbers.
Mhm.
Or I go on maternity leave, you made it really hard for me to get a promotion. Or, I mean, you could just, like, I could just come up with scenario after scenario. It's the idea that I really want to reinforce is having a team that can contradict you and challenge you actually stops you from doing dumb things like that.
It's so true. It's so true. All we have to do is just listen to our people. They're telling us, they're giving us the path that we need to go into.
That's right. That's right. And you have to listen and be open to consider. And then from there, I think you're equipping yourself as a leader, not just to be like, okay, well, everyone thinks I'm a nice guy now because I included everyone's perspective. It's about making better decisions. Ultimately, I'm going to make a better decision with other people's input than I ever would by myself.
Mm. I love where we're ending. This was such a great discussion. Thank you so much, Christopher. Can you tell the audience where we can find you and how we can learn more about you?
Yeah, so there's really 3 things that I would recommend. So the easy way to find me is I'm Christopher Fox on LinkedIn. You'll find me associated with the company Ideas Led Growth. I'm very open to having people connect with me. And I love it actually when people engage with me on LinkedIn. So that's piece number one. Piece number two, if you want to take a look at the website, it's ideasledgrowth.com. No hyphens or punctuation, just ideasledgrowth.com. That's where you'll find I blog pretty regularly. Then you'll also find access to my newsletter. I have a weekly newsletter that people can subscribe to where I talk about a whole range of things. Some of them are very focused on marketing. A lot of them, I like my newsletter to be a little bit broader than just the business that I do. So a lot of times I'm writing about creativity, about personal development, about organizational issues. So I also would really encourage people to subscribe to the newsletter, which you can get to either from my LinkedIn profile or the website.
All in all, I'm so glad we had this discussion. Hopefully we'll get you back and we'll talk some more of different topics. But
yeah, always happy to. This was really enjoyable for me as well.
thank you so much. And we'll talk soon.
All right, take care.